welcome. My name is Daylene Magsam. I'm a special education consultant here at Easterseals Outreach.
My name is Jenny Eubanks. I'm also a special education consultant with Outreach.
And we're so excited you could join us today to talk about the zoning plan. The first thing I would like to tell you about is our team here at Outreach. We are a multidisciplinary team serving students with disabilities ages 3 through 21 throughout the state of Arkansas. We're grant funded through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and we're employees of Easterseals, Arkansas. Because of those relationships, we have the unique opportunity to serve the mission and vision of both organizations. Our team is where that kind of all comes together, and we're here to serve students with disabilities and their teachers throughout the state. This is where we're headed today in relation to zoning plans. As we go through the training, you may want to jot down some notes, and our goal for you is that you'll have all the information you need to create a zoning plan at the end of our time together. The goal of Project Prepare is to close the research to practice gap, which can be as much as 20 years. And that's a long time to wait for the research to trickle down into our classrooms. So we're hoping that we can shorten that gap. And we've chosen this mission because we know if we can get teachers training in what research says works for students with disabilities, we will reach that end destination of positive student outcomes. There are a few initiatives you see on the screen that we'll highlight in our work with Project Prepare, including professional learning communities, high leverage practices, inclusive practices, and evidence-based practices. A zoning plan is a fundamental beginning planning piece for a classroom. All of the other schedules in your room will flow from this document. So we're going to touch on this again later, but planning ahead will really help you when those unplanned events happen, and it can shorten the time needed to resolve the issues and get back on track. So basically, we're going to plan ahead for less stress. A zoning plan is a document that shows where every staff and student are for the entire school day. That sounds like a lot, but just to kind of put it into a nutshell, a zoning plan is a visual representation that's very specific, it's efficient, and it's life-changing. The example on the right is more of a whole class schedule, which isn't the same as a zoning plan. That's not to say that it's wrong to have a whole class schedule in your classroom, because often the two work very well together. But just to give a little bit of a non-example of what a zoning plan is not. And then it will give you detailed information, like I said, about where everyone is and what they're doing throughout the day. Sorry, Jenny, go ahead, please. Thank you. Why use a zoning plan? So why are we here to talk about this, and what is the benefit? Well, first of all, there's too much to keep in your head. As a teacher, you have all of those responsibilities, where everyone needs to be, what they need to be doing, which staff members you want to work with which students at what time. You have all of that information in your head, but then you become kind of a director, and it requires you to get everyone to where they need to go. But if we create a successful zoning plan, it takes that out of your head, puts it on paper, and allows everyone else to know what the plan is, and for that plan to continue even when you need to leave the room. So it's going to provide structure and predictability for staff and students. It will improve transitions. It will increase instructional time, which is, of course, a very big benefit. That's why we're here, right? To provide instruction for our students. And it's great for sub-plans. If you've ever heard of a man-down plan, that's a really easy thing to get going once you have a zoning plan. Then you just take your zoning plan, take one person out, and decide where you're going to have those students if someone's gone, when someone's gone, because that's inevitable, right? When staff members, even ourselves as a teacher, when we need to be gone. And then another note is that when the teacher is absent, it always works well to have the a para that's in the classroom that's familiar, take the teacher's spot for the day, and have the sub replace the para role in the classroom. That's one way a zoning plan can be really helpful. And just a quick note, these benefits are only going to happen if the zoning plan is used and taught consistently.
Okay, thanks, Daleen. So we are going to jump into some suggested zones, but first I'd want to give a quick overview about what a zone is. That may not be a term that you've heard or used frequently, but all a zone is a clearly defined area of the classroom intended for a specific purpose, and your students are going to rotate through those areas or zones during their school day. So some other words that you may have heard used instead of zones are stations or centers.
Okay.
Your zoning plan, when you get ready to create your template, you can use whatever program you are comfortable with. This is created in Google Docs. You can also use Microsoft Word, Excel, Google Sheets, whatever you are comfortable with. The first thing that you need to do is make your columns and rows. And when you get that completed, you need to put time down your far left column. This one is broken down into 15-minute time chunks. Some students will rotate at 30 minutes. If you have students in your classroom that need to rotate at different time increments, you can always merge two cells underneath a certain student or under a paraprofessional, whatever group they have. They might have a 30-minute group and you might merge two cells together, whereas the others would be still in 15 minutes. So you have some flexibility there. You will also need to label your related service providers or special services. So you might see nursing services underneath that. If you have a student that has a personal care plan, you might want to list it under there. That might be a great place for that. You also need to make sure to label your teacher and paraprofessionals. This schedule had 2 paraprofessionals. Sometimes teachers have 1. I've seen all the way up to 4. So however many you have, that's what you need to put into your plan. And last, you need to make sure that you have a column for general education. That could include your inclusion time. It could include whole school assemblies. It could also include recess, any lunchtime. Anytime your student goes out to a general education classroom, you want to make sure that that's noted on your schedule. Before you get started plugging in your items, you want to consider gathering these documents. Your master schedule is vital. You have to have it to create your zoning plan. You will also need your staff duty schedule, and usually you get those 2 documents at the beginning of the school year. You will want to have IEPs for each student, or if you came to our last training over student data summaries and data binders, a student data summary is a great place to get that information, or any arrival or dismissal times or special circumstances. So what we mean there is sometimes you have a student who goes to outside therapies and they might leave early or come late or only come 2 days a week on a limited schedule. Any of those types of scenarios, you need to have that information before you get started. The next thing that we suggest is collaboration with related services. And I said suggest, but it really is non-negotiable. Speech, OT, PT, they are so vital for a self-contained classroom. You want to prioritize push-in therapy as much as possible. We have been seeing some excellent push-in OT, PT, speech services, even with them working in a group, and it is so great to see. But we do know that sometimes you will have to consider pull-out services for certain students. Maybe there's a noise concern and you're working on isolated speech sounds and you can't hear the student. So perhaps you would need to pull out for some things like that. But push-in is priority. And then you also want to make sure that you're selecting zones that are supportive to therapy. So what we mean by that is that, like I said, with the speech sounds, if you are working on teaching speech sounds and you are in a classroom that has something loud going on, you really would not be able to complete your job there. So you would have to do some pull out. All right, first step after you've created your template, you want to plug in your master schedule. Any of your general education time or assemblies, they'll all go in that far right column. And this example has a code using student initials. It doesn't matter what your code is as long as your team knows your code. And it would also be helpful if your administrator or special education coordinator, like they all need to know your code too. Everyone that works with that schedule, related services, they all need to know what your code is. So when they come in and they pick it up, they can read it and know which student is where and exactly what's happening in the classroom. You also want to make sure that you're plugging in your building schedule. So that might include extra duties. So here we have an example of car duty in the morning. You will also have related services times plugged in. And so that would be, like I said earlier, occupational therapy, speech language therapy, physical therapy. You might also want to put nursing services under there. Staff breaks, lunch, and plan time. And I want to really push making sure that you take your plan time and your lunch. Daylene and I both were special education teachers for several years before we moved on into a consultant position. And we know how hard it is sometimes to leave what's going on. So we know every once in a while, there will be a scenario where you have to stay and support a student, but we want you to make sure that that is not what's typically happening. So really prioritize self-care and making sure that you are taking some time to yourself. You've probably heard the statement, you can't pour from an empty cup. Make sure you're taking those times. And then I mentioned personal care plans that would fall underneath the related services. And then last, you want to make sure that you're plugging in recess, lunch, and activity for your students.